Welcome everyone to the inaugural call of the Biodiversity Leaders Group for Harris. We are grateful for your presence and attention this evening. My name is Georgia Silvera Seamans. I co-organize and I'm co-hosting this event with Marielle Anzelone, who you will hear from shortly. I would like to thank this evening's stellar set of speakers who have given generously of their time, experience, and expertise. We're thankful for the many ways they have shown up, as well as for all the folks who are helping us behind the scenes. A special shout out to Aidan Donaghy, who is this evening's Zoom support specialist. As a huge fan of cities and the people and more than human lives within them, I could not be more thrilled to advocate for biodiversity in my city, New York City, as well as nationwide. We are in the midst of an extremely significant ecological crisis whose many impacts are disproportionate across space and time. Thank you for joining us to support the messages you will hear tonight and to lift up our calls for action to the Harris Walls campaign. Now over to Marielle.
Hi, Georgia. Thank you. Hi, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Marielle Anzelone, and I am a co-organizer and co-host of this evening's event. And as you know, one of the things that we discussed in our outreach was that we're here tonight to help get Kamala Harris and Tim Walz elected. We are going to be fundraising for the campaign. But we're also here to raise awareness and drive collective action on biodiversity issues across the US. And as Georgia mentioned, scientists have told us that we're living in an age of extinction. Planetary loss of biological diversity is one of the greatest challenges of our time. Around the world, nature is being lost at an alarming rate. Human activity has destabilized ecosystems, damaged habitat, disrupted ocean life, exploited wild plant and animal species, and polluted air, land, and water. To address this crisis globally, the United Nations formed the Convention on Biological Diversity in 1992. This multinational treaty to save biodiversity included all 195 UN member countries, with the sole exception of the United States. For decades, the absence of the US from this agreement has undermined conservation efforts both home and abroad. For nearly 30 years, the world's richest country has never paid CBD dues, hosted conferences, or truly engaged with other world leaders. This has kept nature off the national agenda, which has resulted in less funding for research, less media coverage, and fewer scientists studying the problem. So nature, ecology, species, ecosystem services, these terms are not interchangeable with climate change. And yet climate change is used to refer to the environment at large. And climate change impacts the living world, but it is not the same as the living world. The issue is when we frame everything as a climate problem, we only get climate solutions. When Superstorm Sandy hit New York City in 2012, the North Shore of Staten Island was spared from the worst of it by a natural buffer of forests and marshes. So these residents of Graniteville, which is an environmental justice community, have been fighting to save this wetland that saved them. This wetland is threatened with development. And even in New York City, where we have a city council that has regularly pledged to have an ambitious climate agenda, they voted to let development happen. So there's a huge disconnect here. When we talk about climate and talk about biodiversity, they are intersectional and related, and we need to be focused on both because we have two global crises. Thankfully, though, the Biden-Harris administration has made significant strides, including the ambitious goal of conserving 30% of US lands and water by 2030. So we have less than 6 years to meet these targets. US leadership on these issues will be crucial for the future of our planet. Now, it is my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Douglas Tallamy. Doug Tallamy is an entomologist and author of several books, including Bringing Nature Home, and co-founder of Homegrown National Park. His work has transformed restoration ecology. And I think I speak for many of us in saying that he has changed the way we look at holes in leaves. Welcome, Doug.
Thank you, Marielle. That's a great introduction. I'm going to, my charge is to talk about why we need biodiversity. So I'm going to reiterate some of the things that you said, reminding everybody that there are two environmental crises on this planet. We have climate change, of course, but we also have a biodiversity crisis. And if we had no climate change, we would still have a biodiversity crisis. And we see the figures all the time. There's global insect decline. The World Wildlife Fund tells us we've lost 2/3 of Earth's wildlife since 1970. We've lost 3 billion breeding birds in North America. That's 1/3 of our North American bird population already gone. Now the UN predicts we're going to lose 1 million species to extinction in the next 20 years. And they made that prediction 3 years ago. So now it's the next 17 years. Now, fortunately, that's a prediction, hasn't happened yet, and we have to make sure it does not happen because those, of course, are the species that keep us alive on this planet. So why does biodiversity matters? It is biodiversity. It is the plants and animals that run the ecosystems that we and every other living thing in this planet depend on. Way back in 1955, Robert MacArthur, a brilliant theoretical ecologist, predicted, he said that ecosystem productivity and ecosystem stability depends on the number of species in the ecosystem. So as the number of species in an ecosystem increases, productivity and stability increases. But as you start to take species away from an ecosystem, then their productivity and stability decrease. What do I mean by productivity? It's the production of life support. It's the production of what keeps us, again, and everything else alive on this planet. The production of oxygen, pretty important. Clean water, slowing water's journey to the sea where it becomes too salty to use. Carbon sequestration is a function of ecosystem productivity. Of course, plants are pulling carbon out of the atmosphere, building their tissues out of that carbon, and then pumping the rest of the carbon into the soil where it becomes very stable. It's plants that are preventing floods. It's plants that are moderating weather systems. It's plants that are producing the food that just about all life depends on. So think of it, if we lose plants, we're going to have to eat sunlight, and that'll be a challenge. Ecosystems are providing pest control. They're providing pollination service, providing seed dispersal. They build topsoil. The list goes on and on. And what would happen if we lose some of the biodiversity that runs those ecosystems? Let's just talk about what would happen if we lost insects. And E.O. Wilson reminded us of this way back in 1987 with his famous paper, The Little Things That Run the World. If we lost insects, we would lose most of our flowering plants. And if we lost most of our flowering plants, that would disrupt energy flow through our terrestrial ecosystems so much that the food webs that support our vertebrate animals would collapse. We would lose our amphibians, our birds, our mammals, and our reptiles. They would all disappear. We would lose insect decomposers that rapidly turn over nutrients, and the earth would rot because all we would have is bacteria and fungi. And of course, humans wouldn't survive any of those very drastic services. Somebody asked me, what is the single most important thing that I could do? This was a person. What could I do to help biodiversity? The most important thing. And I thought about it, and I think the answer is really clear. The most important thing you can do is vote. The most important thing you can do is vote with the future of life on Earth in mind. Never vote for somebody who denies the existence of something. I'm sorry, I'm lisping because I lost a bottom tooth. Vote with the idea that whoever you vote for is going to determine the quality of life for you, for your children, for your grandchildren, and for all the plants and animals on the planet. That is an awesome responsibility. We would not have a biodiversity crisis if everybody kept environmental issues in mind in the voting booth. And I think in future election coming up here, the choice of candidates is very obvious. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Doug. It is my pleasure to now introduce Dudley Edmondson. Dudley is a photographer and author of Black and Brown Faces in America's Wild Spaces and the forthcoming book, people the planet needs now. Voices for justice, science, and a future. His work champions the right of people of color to nature. I will definitely be pre-ordering People the Planet Needs Now, and that link will be placed in the chat. Welcome, Dudley.
Thank you for the invite and welcome attendees. Glad you folks have come out to hear us talk about biodiversity and as it relates to pretty much everybody, and also to the Harris Walz campaign. I wanted to speak on it from a very personal perspective of what I've been doing to sort of promote biodiversity on the property that I live on. I live in Duluth, Minnesota. I've been here at this particular location for 3 decades or so. It was your typical, yard with what I would call, typical house plants and garden plants that you'd buy at a greenhouse or whatever. And I deliberately started removing a lot of that stuff and putting in native plants and trees. And I was very specific about what species I brought in, around pollinators and things like that. But also what I've been doing is trying to have the most diverse plant life on my property, and understanding that the more diverse my plant species are, the more diverse the wildlife and pollinators that will ultimately end up here. And so last year I put a large prairie / meadow in my front yard where there were 2 giant blue spruce trees that we took out, and some buckthorn, and we removed all of that. That habitat really wasn't really being used by anything. And now that I've put that in, it's the 2nd year that garden has been in. There are plants that are 8 to 10 feet tall. I'm getting all kinds of warblers and finches and things that are coming in different times of the year. I spent a lot of time up close looking at that garden and seeing all the different pollinators that are coming in, I think last year I had 13 species of butterfly that showed up in that garden. And clearly before I put that garden in, there would have been 0. And so I'm seeing all these different bees and things, some of them, threatened species and things like that. And so what I've learned, or what I really already knew, was that with plant biodiversity, you're just going to create more biodiversity in an area. And currently, I serve on the council, Lassard Sam's Outdoor Heritage Council here in Minnesota. We spend hundreds of millions of dollars every year in conservation and restoration and preservation work. And I have just today, actually the last 2 days, I've been on an 8-hour call with council members at the Capitol, and we have about $160 million to allocate for everything from prairie restoration, wetlands restoration, and forest restoration. It gets written up in the form of a bill, and that bill then goes to legislators, and they typically will approve it. And so the work that I've been doing with that council, I'm actually only the 2nd person of color on that council in its history. And I'm proud to serve on it, and trying to get more people of color to sort of serve on it and be part of this process of making decisions about conservation. But when I look at what the Biden-Harris presidency and even the Obama presidency did around conservation and protection of our natural resources and things like that, I really feel that this ticket with Harris Walz is going to just continue us making all these gains in conservation and permanently protecting our natural resources. And so I think with that, I will end my comments. Thank you for the opportunity to speak, though.
Thank you so much, Dudley. I appreciate that. And that's such a good point about gardening with natives. And that's also the work that Doug Tallamy has done too. So that's great synchronicity. I also want to tell people that they need to absolutely check out your photography because it's really breathtaking. Next up, we have Monica Medina, who is an expert in ocean policy, law, and diplomacy. She is the first ever U.S. ambassador for biodiversity. And fun fact, I attended COP15 in Montreal in 2022. And one of my goals while I was there was to meet her. And she was so popular, it was literally impossible to gain access. She was just surrounded by crowds. And so it just shows how important her role is and that the world is really hungry for this kind of leadership. Welcome, Monica.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here with a bunch of kindred spirits who love biodiversity and love nature. And what I'm here to say is that this love of nature has been embedded in the Biden administration from the beginning and will continue into a Harris administration should we, knock on wood, manage to get ahead and stay ahead and win this election. And so what I really want to tell you is the story of how I've spent a lot of time in and out of administrations in the past 35 years of my career. But my husband had worked for now President Biden when he was a senator, and his campaign was sort of small when it got off the ground. And we wrote some briefing papers, and he latched onto 30 by 30. You know, the hallmark now agreement of the Convention on Biological Diversity to conserve 30% of the planet by 2030. That is now agreed by everyone on the planet, including the US, even though we're not a member of that convention yet. But anyway, President Biden latched onto that, and he continues to talk about it. He tweeted, or he did an Instagram post just 3 days ago talking about the importance of achieving that 30% goal for the US. And it still is a goal for the US. We have a long way to go. But what I'm here to say is that there was a huge commitment in the Biden administration to not only reversing the 4 years of bad policies and terrible conservation measures put in place by the Trump administration, but also advancing them tremendously, whether it was through the Inflation Reduction Act and all of the funding ways that we could build up nature as a defense against climate change, or whether it was in the infrastructure bill, where again we're using nature and trying to think about how to live in a more harmonious way with nature and build out in ways that enhances our ability to live in harmony with nature, whether it's planting trees in urban areas or thinking about coastal resilience like that marsh on Long Island. So the Biden administration has been fully committed. And what I'm here to say is that I am certain with 100% of my being that every cell in my body is certain that the Harris administration, should we get lucky enough to get her elected and Governor Walz elected, they will continue these policies because they see the environmental issues through the lens of nature and clean air and clean water and environmental justice. And so I think when you think about how to get people excited about this election, people that might not always agree on every issue, this is one where I think most Americans, a huge majority of Americans, do agree. And what they need to know is that there's a huge difference between the two candidates. And that's why every single person on this call can make a difference by helping to convince anyone they think is on the fence that they need to come over to our side and vote for Harris and Walz, because that's the way to really support nature and biodiversity, whether it's implementing our laws like the Endangered Species Act, or whether it's the huge funding. We may not be a member of the CBD, but we are. The US is one of the largest funders of biodiversity globally. We fund more biodiversity through the Global Environment Facility and the Agency for International Development, USAID. We fund more biodiversity than any other country in the world. So we know that it's a popular thing. We can get those laws through Congress, and we can even implement them now in a way that's really effective, but only if we win. only if we can keep going. And we know what's on the other side of that fence, which is, a re-election of Trump would lead to more chaos and more dissension and more degradation of the natural world, whether it's at home through drill baby drill, or whether it's through exploitation around the world that our industries will be helping to fund, our government will be pushing for. That's what the State Department will do. They will turn around a lot of the work that we've been doing to help countries be more conservation minded and go and drill everywhere. And that's not where we need to go. That would take us completely in the wrong direction. So I guess what I'm here to say is, and there will be someone from the campaign joining us later, and I am working with them to make sure that they really are able to make this message really clear and resounding through all of the work that and the things that the Vice President and Governor Walz say. But really, I think we know that we have to get more people to turn out. It's not just you voting, but it's bringing anyone else that you know to the polls who will vote this way, and persuading anyone that you think might be on the fence to vote for Harris and Walz, and making phone calls and door knocking. Yes, donating, even if it's just a little bit, but every little bit will matter. This is going to be a really close race. There's incredible enthusiasm out there. They've raised a lot of money, but it's still not going to be enough. We know that we're up against a really tough opponent who's going to lie and use, kind of scare tactics, talk about sharks as being bad, things that may not really make any sense at all, but will maybe appeal to certain people because they're thinking about nature in a different way. And what we can do, what this group can do, is hopefully build an even bigger, broader group of people who care about biodiversity, who will come out and vote, who will volunteer, and who will help get Harris and Walz elected. I think if there's one thing that rings true about their campaign, it's joy. And if there's one thing that nature brings every single person who gets to be in it, it's joy. So just think about that, and think about all the ways that you could help, because every single person on this call can help and can make a difference in winning this election. And if we do, it will make a difference for the future of the planet. And I'm not being hyperbolous when I say that. I'm not exaggerating. It really will. And I've seen it. I've seen how we can impact these international bodies, how we can work together domestically to make things better, but only if we win. So thanks very much for organizing this. And I'm so proud to be here, and so proud to have served, and so proud to be helping Vice President Harris and Governor Tim Walz hopefully win in November. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Monica. Folks, we need to make our voting plans as soon as this call is over. If you haven't already, bring your friends and family and neighbors with you. And nature can be joyous. It is my pleasure to introduce Wade Crowfoot, our next speaker. Wade has made a career of championing California's biodiversity and nature stewardship policy. I've heard it said that where California leads, the nation follows. California was out front with the first 30 by 30 state plan. My current home state, New York City, is second, and I'm totally excited to see which state is next. Welcome, Wade.
Hey, Georgia and Marielle, thank you so much for having me on and sharing some thoughts. And it's a thrill to go right after Monica Medina, who's one of my personal heroes as well. I'm coming to you from sunny California, where the sun is still shining today. Behind me is our Bay Delta, which is our largest estuary in the state, where two mighty rivers come together. And for a discussion of biodiversity geeks, this is one of our biodiversity hotspots in one of the most biodiverse states in the union. So look, I'm full of joy and energy. This is a good day because we're taking the future into our own hands. And I got to hand it to Georgia and Marielle, who didn't wait for someone to tap them on the shoulder. They built this discussion and are going to build it over the next just 70 days. It's remarkable. Look, the stakes are high and we know what is at stake. The climate crisis is accelerating, impacting us all wherever we are in the United States. And this biodiversity crisis, this extinction crisis, is accelerating too. What bands us together on this discussion is our love of nature. You know, I'm an environmental official in my day, and I have the privilege of working with Governor Newsom. But outside of work, I am a lover of nature. I love the outdoors. I love that, passing that on to my daughter. And, you know, for me, I'm one of thousands of people in California protecting our natural places, our ecosystems, and obviously one of millions across the country. And wherever you're zooming in from, I know that there's that special place, that ecosystem, that plant or animal that brings you joy that you're working to protect. And we've got a special moment to do that. I can tell you from personal experience that leadership on biodiversity matters. The last 4 years have been incredible. We have more funding flowing through our states, our local governments, our nonprofit organizations than we ever had, thanks to President Biden and Vice President Harris. And that's making a difference. In California, we're moving leaps and bounds towards our own 30 by 30 target, which is only possible as a result of federal leadership. You may or may not know that thanks to the president and the vice president, 1.4 million acres of land across our country has been protected permanently through the use of what's called the Antiquities Act and establishing or expanding national monuments. I had the thrill of a lifetime just in April when I was able to join tribal leaders and leaders from environmental conservation groups in the Oval Office to watch President Biden sign the expansion of 2 monuments in California. And it was the vice president at that time who reminded us that she was the author of a bill actually starting that movement to expand the San Gabriel National Monument when she was in the US Senate. And I've had the good fortune of knowing Kamala Harris personally for the last 2 decades, having lived and worked in San Francisco. And I can tell you, she is the real deal on the environment, much like she's the real deal across the board. When she was a local elected official, when she was the state's attorney general, when she was our US Senator from California, environment was right up there with her other key priorities. And to Monica's point, this will provide tremendous continuity for us. It's remarkable what the administration has done with the leadership of Vice President Harris, President Biden. But it's also remarkable what will happen if Donald Trump and J.D. Vance get elected. We know what they're capable of. I know personally, having been in a well-covered debate with a temporary quick argument with President Trump, that he's not even acknowledging the impact of climate change, much less biodiversity loss. We literally have their playbook of what they would do when in office. And of course, it's Project 2025, abolishing NOAA and all the climate science that it provides, largely dismantling the US EPA, protecting impacted communities from pollution, clawing back all of that funding that's possible to claw back, that's actually making a difference, abolishing the Antiquities Act that protects those areas like these national monuments. And so the list goes on and on and on. And the world is watching. Marielle talked about and Monica talked about this international momentum that we have to protect biodiversity. Believe it or not, a couple weeks before the election in Colombia, the world is coming together once again to identify how they're implementing that 30 by 30 commitment. And I can tell you, if the world's most powerful country with the largest economy isn't going to lead on biodiversity, a lot of countries will ask themselves, why should they? So from my point of view, this 70 days is like no other. I think we all have day jobs. We all have other responsibilities, but we have to step up. And that means giving until it hurts. I actually went on Act Blue while Monica was talking and made another donation. We have to organize. We have to volunteer. We have to volunteer for phone banks in swing states where it matters. We need to be like Georgia and Marielle and take the future into our own hands. We can do this. This is an incredible moment. And I think we all feel really energized. We have to take the momentum of the last few weeks and maintain it over the last 70 days. And ultimately, I think if we're successful, we can demonstrate that people and nature can thrive together. And that's really our watchword and what we need to do as environmental leaders. So build this movement, build your networks, and work hard over the next 70 days. Let's take the future into our own hands. Thanks so much, Georgia.
Wade, oh my goodness, thank you so much. That was incredible. I also got to hear him speak at COP15 in Montreal, and he also had a big crowd, and now you know why. Really inspiring. Thank you so much. So next up, we have Michelle Nijhuis. She is a journalist and author of one of my favorite books, the award-winning Beloved Beasts. which is described as compelling and necessary for anyone interested in conservation. Welcome, Michelle.
Hi, thank you, Marielle. Thank you, Georgia, for organizing this, and thank you all for coming. I want to, like Monica and Wade, I want to take a page from the Harris Walls campaign and remember that what draws us to this work, what draws us to this often very difficult, frustrating work is joy. If you work on behalf of other species in any capacity, you've probably been finding joy in other species and other animals since you were a little kid. And I bet that everybody who's speaking today and who's listening today really knows that more profound joy of standing in an ancient forest or walking across a patch of prairie or watching birds migrate high over your city and feeling part of something much, much larger than yourself. And conservation protects those sources of joy. And to me, I see it as really protecting the best of ourselves, the best of humanity. During the Biden-Harris administration, we have seen tremendous conservation progress. It's not always in the headlines, but we have just seen really tremendous progress. And it's thanks in large part to the appointment of Deb Haaland at the Department of the Interior. She's the first Indigenous member of the cabinet, and as secretary, she's made history by elevating the conservation leadership of Native communities. As Wade referred to, over the past 3.5 years, her department has established hundreds of co-management and co-stewardship agreements between tribal and federal governments, government-to-government agreements. And this is so important. I think we all know that for too long, the conservation establishment, and this is worldwide, has overlooked and disrupted people's traditional conservation practices in their home ecosystems. And that, unfortunately, I think has limited the conservation movement's reach and effectiveness. It's one of the reasons why today, part of what should be a universal cause, the protection of our life support systems, is still seen by many as a narrow special interest. So supporting the protection and restoration of ecosystems by those who know them best is a very important historical corrective, but it's also a powerful strategic move. As of Monday, and Wade also referred to this, national monuments and other landscapes co-managed by tribes were among the more than 41 million acres protected by the Department of the Interior during the Biden-Harris administration. That's an area about the size of Florida, new acreage protected. Yesterday, another 28 million, so 41 million, and then another 28 million acres of public land in Alaska was protected from oil and gas drilling. Secretary Haaland has also made conservation a priority on the 250 million acres of public land administered by the Bureau of Land Management. That's an eighth of the country. I mean, these are huge areas we're talking about. So that alone, I mean, among many other things, that alone lays the groundwork for even more and broader conservation progress in the Harris Walls administration. So if you support equitable, effective conservation, if you want to see North American ecosystems protected and restored for future generations, if you see conservation as urgent and necessary, as I think we all do, please help elect Kamala Harris, Tim Walz, and protect our sources of joy for ourselves, for future generations. Knock on doors, write letters, make calls, give as much as you're able. I've been writing vote forward letters in front of Netflix every night. Please join me in doing that. Pick your show. Encourage your loved ones to do so too. This is for all of us in a very deep way. It's for all of us animals, and all of our habitats. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Michelle, for your impactful remarks. The choice is clear right now. Vice President Harris, as president, will continue prioritizing conservation and equitable stewardship. We need to act now. Saving nature and all of us is an urgent issue. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce the youngest speaker of the evening, Scarlett Harper. Scarlett is a 14-year-old environmental activist from Illinois who has worked on legislation to protect native bees. Her passion is to be a voice for wildlife. Join me in welcoming Scarlett.
Hi, you guys. I'm Scarlett. I'm really excited to talk here tonight. This is such an amazing and special group of people that are getting behind an amazing and special candidate. So my personal story in biodiversity and environmental work just started because I love to garden and I had a really deep connection with all of the wildlife that was in my yard, and I spent all of my time outside. And so I grew to really care about those things. And I went from seeing many years ago, probably, well, not too many years since I'm only 14, but a few years ago, probably 7 species of bees in a given day in my yard and hundreds of bees in my garden. And that changed over time, where I was seeing less diversity of bees and so many fewer bees and so many fewer different types of insects. And it was really troubling to me because I'd always cared about them and made so many observations about them. And so I strived to find the reason that this was happening. And I did research on the topic and made observations in my town. And one of the things that I would notice would be that I would see mosquito spraying trucks and the people who were applying pesticides to kill mosquitoes. And I did a little bit of research on this and found out that one of the main issues for bee populations in residential areas is that they're very affected by the pesticides that are used to kill mosquitoes. And these pesticides, as I learned in my home state of Illinois, are very unregulated. And this is a huge problem for bees because these pesticides are lethal to bees and to so many other insects. But it's a bigger issue than that because when you take out a group of insects or a group of bees, that has ripple effects throughout an ecosystem where then the plants that those bees were pollinating aren't doing as well. And the animals that were eating those insects are seeing population shifts, and it swings the whole ecosystem out of balance. And so it has a bigger effect than people would naturally see. And bees specifically are very important to humans because they pollinate our food supply. And we really can't live without them because 1 in 3 bites of our food are pollinated by a bee, and it's impossible for us to live normal lives without them. So it was a multifaceted issue. And it doesn't need to be something, I talk a lot about selfish environmentalism, which is a concept that I love because I'll explain it. You don't need, it's lovely if you care about environmental issues because you care about bees and wildlife and all of these things, but you don't need to see why it is very practical to stand up for environmental issues and protect our wildlife and protect our bees, protect our earth, because we need all of those things to survive as humans. And so you can be a selfish environmentalist. And I personally care deeply about this issue for other reasons. So I ended up reaching out to my state representative to ask her if she'd be interested in working on a piece of legislation to try to address the issue of mosquito pesticides specifically, because that's one place that I felt like I could make an impact on this issue. And she was a lovely woman who also felt that this was a deeply important issue. And we worked together to write and pass a piece of legislation. This piece of legislation was written and it took many months of lobbying. And we found it very important to ask Illinois lawmakers to prioritize our ecosystems and our wildlife and public health, while we had pesticide companies who were fighting to block the bill, which, to be fair, in Illinois mostly consisted of passive aggressive emails. But it was something to pass the bill that required lawmakers who believed that climate change is real, that environmental issues are real, and that biodiversity is deeply important. And so we couldn't have done it without those lawmakers, which is why it is so important that we as people who have influence and an ability to sway the votes of the people around us, an ability to donate and spend our time to put candidates who will promote biodiversity issues and protect our earth. It's really important that we step up in this moment and make that choice. And what I will say is that Kamala Harris has been prioritizing those issues for her whole career. She went after polluters as a prosecutor. She she put the tie-breaking vote on the Inflation Reduction Act, which may not be specifically a biodiversity bill, but it shows that she cares about environmental issues. And that is what we need in the leader of our country right now. She can't become president without all of our help. And as been mentioned on this call, that doesn't just mean your money, but it does mean your money. That doesn't just mean your time, but it does mean your time. It means putting all of those things first. And it also means that you have to be willing to speak up in your sphere of influence and get the people who listen to you and respect you and care what you think to realize why she is the candidate for our future. I'm going to be living in a world for the rest of my life where the choices that we make now in how we protect our environment are going to affect the earth that I get to live on, and whether it's a healthy planet with biodiversity and healthy ecosystems. And I can't vote, so I need you to be voting. I need you to be using your money and your time to help protect the planet that I'm going to live on, and all of you are going to live on. We have one candidate who is going to prioritize our future, Kamala Harris, and another who doesn't even care about it. And so I need you to be putting all of your energy into getting that candidate elected.
Wow, Scarlett, thank you so much. That was really incredible, and just really lovely to hear about actionable things that people can do locally to help protect biodiversity where they live. Appreciate you sharing that. And Scarlett was a very recent addition, so we're very grateful to her. Next up, I have the great pleasure of introducing Dr. J. Drew Lanham. He is a poet, a wildlife biologist, and MacArthur Genius Fellow. His essay, 9 Rules for the Black Birdwatcher, launched important conversations about belonging and safety while seeking joy in green spaces. Welcome, please join me in welcoming Drew.
Thank you, Marielle, and thank you for having us here. It's a pleasure and honor to be sitting shoulder to shoulder virtually with so many kindred spirits. I thought I'd go maybe in a little bit of a different direction tonight and share something with you that I've been working. In the 1997 movie Contact, astronaut Ellie Arroway, played by Jodie Foster, said they should have sent a poet in response to what she discovered in her deep space and a deeper mind probe. And so here I am with you this evening, a lifelong bird watcher, a career ornithologist, a conservationist hunter, and poet, proudly supporting Vice President Kamala Harris and Governor Tim Walz. But now in this age formerly known as the Anthropocene, in this present epoch of woe is us, the questions that we face as bipedal interlopers in a multi-billion year continuum that in the time-space span between Big Bang and open carry pistol bang, on a continuum that places us squarely as arrogant specks of dust on a blue marble planet, spinning through a fathomless infinity where our lives really don't register as time at all. Our self-appointed roles through our own hubris and or duty by the gods of our own making is as stewards to save this earth. This looms large and larger than we could horrifically imagine. And so, yes, this is the age of woe, but it's also the age of woe. Let's stop. Let's slow down. We worry, then we worry some more. In the midst of all the worrying, we must find a way to figure out how to stop destroying every living thing, including ourselves. And so, as lovers of wildness and wild things, and hopefully of one another, there is now more than ever in our sizzling third rock from the sun life, our extincting predicament, there is a necessary convergence to make good on the time that we have left. This time, whatever it is, maybe 70 days, demands we come together in new ways that are actually old ways. This will demand an urgency. It will demand purpose. It will demand persistence. And yes, this will demand joy and love. Given this current state of conservation and environmental affairs, I think that our faith needs a church. Yes, our faith in nature's nurturing, with hellish fires burning the world up from down under, a global flood drowning polar bears, and brimstone falling in the form of policies torn apart, it seems time to regather the congregation of wildlings for some sort of meditative dawn chorus song singing. And so there must be some coming together in concerted worship of all of us concerned with nature. And no, I'm not speaking of any high steeple, stained glass, temple wall place to worship some deity we can neither see nor feel, but rather some unified knowing that what we have to communion over is the work we do and the kindred heartedness and mindful gathering. The scripture that I expect us to adhere to is the science, rigorous investigation and data objectively gathered, chapter and verse, to combat the deniers. There is a what, there's a how, there's a when, a where, and a why in our predicament that I would offer. The what is obviously this existential crisis, these existential crises that are all interconnected. Nature and our disrespect of it and our disrespect of humanity. The choice between going forward in hope with joy is in the hard work to come. We know the vast differences in policy and practice between the candidates. There is a clear choice we must make if life on Earth truly matters to us. Our how is by rolling our sleeves up. To give, and then give some more. Not just the green stuff, but also of your time and your talents. And no, watching the birds and loving wildness will not be enough. The when is right now, immediately. Don't wait until November 5th, but when that day comes, strike the mightiest blow. Vote. Help others and take them to their places to vote. Where? Act locally in your own pond, but always think and feel downstream. Why? Because we can't afford the continual suffering. Because we can't keep losing ground. Because brother bear and sister bird are watching and demand to be heard. We must all become Loraxes, but to speak for trees and wildness and green space, we must also speak for one another. Those who have not been at the table, those who have not been given the space. We all share same air, same water, same soil, same earth, and the same fate. And the who again is obviously us. It's you. And of course, Vice President Kamala Harris and Governor Tim Walz, our future president and vice president. Because in the end, y'all, I want you to remember, for all that we admire in the migratory sojourns of the birds over our heads dodging falling stars, the joy we derive or will derive in this victory will ultimately be the justice that we give ourselves and to nature. Thank you.
Thank you, Drew. The arts have always been a soul and heart connecting pathway to kinship with nature, and you are an incredible wordsmith, and we are fortunate to be in the presence of your verse and narrative. Really, thank you. I would like to introduce our next speaker, Lydia Millet. Lydia is an acclaimed novelist and wildlife advocate. Her new memoir, We Loved It All, has been described as, and I quote, a guide to navigating the great unraveling of ecological extinction and the climate crisis. Welcome, Lydia.
Thank you so much, and thanks to everyone who showed up for tonight. And I will keep my remarks fairly short and actually strike a list of the things that Kamala has done that are good, because I think it's sort of boring. So what I'll just say is that I've lived here in my desert house and garden for about 25 years now, since I moved from downtown New York. And already in that relatively short span of time, as I walk over the land around my house, right now it's the monsoon season, I notice there are animals and plants who seem to come no more. I see the ones who do come, and I'm grateful for their presence, but I worry about the ones who are absent, and I worry about those who still appear. Sonoran desert toads, tarantulas, bobcats, kit foxes, and just now some devil's claw plants that sprang up after a rain and made these beautiful yellow flowers. I worry, will they come again in 5 years and 25 years from now? Will they still come when I myself am gone? And that's, that part's not science, obviously. I don't know that the animals and plants I don't see are gone from the whole area. They may have moved on. They may be choosing other patches of ground for their homes. But it evokes the larger disappearance that we can and do know with science, the vanishment of creatures and green life that is happening at a breakneck pace and happening on our watch and at our hand. And we need people to speak up for them and act for them. We need serious people who believe in our collective duty to the others, human others for sure. Those among us who don't have power and don't have wealth or privilege or safety or even their basic needs met, but also the others of the more than human world. And we need those people running our government, representing our will to protect our life support and the infinite wonders of the planet we live on. We need people who believe in the knowledge that science brings us, who believe in knowledge in the first place, who place value in the capacity of the law to reflect that knowledge, who respect labor and laborers, including the work and the testimony of those who devote themselves to studying the world we live in, who may dedicate their whole lives to discovering how a pea plant responds to being dropped through the air, or how flatworms can regenerate their bodies, how whales talk to each other with their songs, how orangutan babies learn to build nests, or elephants grieve for their dead. And Kamala Harris, besides being our only bulwark against the truly stunning ignorance and kleptocracy that her opponent embodies, is the most promising candidate we've seen in generations on the matters of biodiversity and climate breakdown and environmental justice. As a DA, Attorney General, and a senator, she stood up for nature, for animals, and for climate action on many fronts. So I want to say, as others have said before me, that we should all be inspired, that we have a real chance here from now till Election Day to keep our energy and to work toward what a Harris government could mean, not only for us and families and friends and the greater human community, but for the future of the world we evolved with and the non-voting citizens of that world, who also deserve to survive and thrive and be able to come back every year and live among us and bring us joy. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lydia. That was really moving. I think about that too, but of course you're just incredibly eloquent in the sense of missing species, that have become your neighbors. And for those of you who haven't read any of Lydia's books, I highly recommend them. They are just incredibly moving and beautiful. So read her books. So I have the great pleasure of introducing Kate Orff next. Kate is a landscape architect and MacArthur Genius Fellow. After New York City's 2012 Superstorm Sandy, her living breakwaters design of artificial oyster reefs was awarded $107 million to help rebuild the coast of Staten Island. Please join me in welcoming Kate.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much. And I'm so excited to see all the great progress in the chat in terms of donating. So my work is highly visual, so I'm going to share screen. Hopefully everyone can see, and spend 4 to 5 minutes just sharing some thoughts with you about nature now and the challenges that we are facing. Of course, you're greatly aware of, this kind of crux of this challenge that we're facing, where, I was born in the arrow on the left, and we're here now in the pink arrow on the right. And so the world that we will be inhabiting is going to have more people. We're going to have sea level, increasing sea level rise, higher temperatures, and it will be increasingly difficult to try to find how nature and people live together. Because, of course, hiding in plain sight, we have the collapse of landscape systems. And for me, I think about biodiversity, but I like to act at the scale of landscapes. And these are the landscapes that are immensely protective relative to climate change, whether it's the forests that clean our air, the reefs that mitigate and attenuate the waves crashing on our coastlines, or the marshes that protect our watery edges. We have vanishing bird species. We have wetlands disappearing. And so what I wanted to say is that nature is a matter of design now, and it's a matter of active policy and engagement. So we all need to get, in my mind, move from a notion of kind of pure conservation to a notion of activism and rebuilding nature at a scale. And so we need to work now at a different scale with different tools, because in my mind, landscapes, which are always inherently about people and nature together, can be a template for thinking and acting. And this was the inspiration for our work here in the New York Harbor, particularly around thinking about how community-driven oyster reefs and artificial reefs could help clean and slow the water and protect the communities that they then serve. So we have to advance regenerative, positive visions, and importantly, connect the dots between ourselves and the natural world, and of course, connect the dots between scales of action. And that is what we're talking about tonight. In my mind, landscapes, which is where I work, is really finds its kind of core at this link between a community, a piece of ground, a piece of land, and shared actions. But none of that is possible without national policy, and the stage is set in national policy and global policy. So we need Harris Walls in the office of the presidency and vice presidency in order to make all this work happen. So after Superstorm Sandy in 2012, we know the story, right? That the places that were the most impacted are actually largely former marshlands here, Jamaica Bay. And we also know that the power to change and engage is in our hands. We have the ability to rebuild these natural systems and work together to do that. So this is, I think, one of the key challenges is rebuilding natural systems, enhancing biodiversity, and also understanding that where and when we build has incredible protective benefit. And this is an image of the living breakwaters in Staten Island, which is, we have a ribbon cutting soon. So the oyster is our engineering partner, and these breakwaters are designed for ecological benefit, and with reef streets that support life both above the water, as you can see on the right, and then below the water, as you can see on the left. Another bioregion, which is incredibly important, that has stories to tell and to teach us all, is the Gulf Coast, which was so impacted by Katrina in 2005, and is greatly impacted by our agricultural practices in a dead zone. But I think this is also a story that can be told around envisioning what our future coast could look like, how to build not just walls against the sort of the water, but understand a three-dimensional ecosystem and how to scale nature-based solutions and in concert with community planning, because the time to act is now, and we can build out and reclaim these landscapes and ground them in restoration science. So I'll close there and just say that what I think is incredibly important is that we think, as we adapt our shorelines, as we adapt our landscapes for climate change, we have to think about nature, and we can and value its protective benefit. So let's think about envisioning new systems and moving away from the conception of nature as a sort of a mathematical, equation that has to be tamed, as you can see on the right in the Army Corps, and think about it as a living, growing landscape. So I'll stop there and just say that critical in landscape is that we have to work together, and I'm really, really excited to support Harris and Walls, because without this federal policy context, I think we all know that the work that we all do on a day-to-day basis is going to be incredibly challenging. So the stakes could not be higher. Thank you so much.
Kate, thank you so much. That was really incredible, and also good to get this 30,000-foot perspective on what we're dealing with. I know I'm always looking down at the tiny little wildflower, so thinking about things from that scale is really powerful. Next up, I am so excited to introduce Jose Gonzalez. He is a conservationist, Chicano, an activist who has founded organizations to help make space for all of us in the outdoors. He also makes killer memes. Check him out on social media. Please welcome Jose.
All too kind. And saludos, everyone. Good to see you all. As I say, órale pues. It's grateful to be here with you. I wanted to offer a few complimentary kind of thoughts and invitations. First, I think, as was mentioned right now, the way that we can embrace our relationship as being a part of nature rather than apart from nature, as that life logic rather than that reductive mechanistic thinking. I've often have said it's the difference between being seen as working as efficiently as a well-oiled machine, as opposed to working as efficiently as a well-nurtured meadow. Because with that invitation, for me, it's the language of ecology. It is the thrivability of biodiversity that has really helped in shaping a lot of how I approach the work, both in relationship to and in service to social justice, for example, and environmental justice. And so that also makes me think about what is action oriented, being a solutionary. And so one of those elements I often think is kind of the know, do, change. And knowing is all of the work of how can we know better to do better and be better. It's staying informed and connected, right? Interrogated, of course, how we make sense of the world and how we want to be in kinship with each other. And that's not enough. It's the si se puede, is the yes we can, pero hazlo, but do it. So the doing better means actually taking action. That does mean going out and voting. It means being registering ourselves to vote. It means knowing that we can vote at the ballot, but also in terms of how we vote with our time, in terms of how we vote with our dollars, in terms of how we show up in all different ways. And that element of no do change is, how do we change the context and the environment in which that can facilitate rather than impede our actions? And this is where the power of policy, especially public policy, comes in, and why it's important to we support kind of Harris Walls as a candidacy and as administration, because the goal isn't here for perfection, of course, and I think that's where people get hung up. It is being able to say, what are the conditions in which we're organizing? What are the conditions in which we're advancing this action that we're taking? Because the reality is, the other element that I often say is, there is a dangerous lure to the doom and gloom kind of perspective and scenario. And for those of that you know, are connected to the reality of the tragedy of the climate crisis and what that means for biodiversity crisis, what that means for ocean crisis, and so forth, is that can sometimes grab attention, but it won't help us to really move into action. And so I, invite people to say, what does it look like to go from doom and gloom to do and bloom? What does it mean to do and to be in the state of blooming? Because I'm also inspired by the line attributed to Pablo Neruda that you may cut all the flowers, but you can't stop the spring. And that's what for me, that's what political action is and can be. It's what it means to really be inspired to be able to move in action and support Harris Waltz, because I want the spring to support us all. And while at times we can feel the reality of losing the flowers, I'm really looking for the conditions to support and inspire that change. And that's my invitation really for everybody, that when you feel captured by the doom and gloom, look to see what is the do and bloom that exists at the individual level for yourself, maybe knowing and doing better, but also what may insist at the collective level, how you're organizing for the conditions to be different, as well as what are we trying to change at the structural policy level. Because that's how we advance forward, and that's how we advance together. And the work is never easy, and yet others have done their best before us. So how do we honor that? And how can we lean into being future ancestors in that way? So in closing, as we often say, pa adelante, siempre pa adelante. And may you all help us collectively reach one of the many finish lines that will help us advance this work. Support Harris Waltz. Gracias.
Thank you very much, Jose. You asked us on this call, how will we be a solutionary? What will we do as individuals and as a community that cares deeply for the more than human world and other people? We need to do with our time, with our dollars as we can, and there are many other ways to affect change. So thank you for this clarion call. It is my pleasure to introduce our next speaker. I'm taking a lot of pleasure in introducing everyone tonight. Tyke James is a vocal advocate for birds. He is also a co-founder of Blackbirders Week and former DC bird watching lobbyist. He's currently a conservation educator living in the Mountain West. Welcome, Tyke.
I'm happy to rise to the occasion with my fellow biodiversity leaders. Good afternoon, good evening to you all. I'm happy to be a part of the collective call to support the Harris Waltz ticket. And I stand before you today similarly as my other speakers with a call for hope and action. Action that perfectly aligns with a shared vision for a better future. We gather here today not just as advocates for biodiversity, of course. Some of us are hungry, but some of us indeed are champions of life in all of its forms. Our collective mission to protect the rich tapestry of life and our planet is fundamentally intertwined with our commitment to peace and human welfare. Consider this. Every dollar we invest in bombing campaigns is a dollar taken away from conservation efforts. Every habitat destroyed in conflict is a loss not just for wildlife, but for the communities that depend on these ecosystems for their livelihoods and their well-being. The birds that we can save are limited by the bombs that are being dropped. It's a crisis of priorities. Fear not, dear listener. The Harris Waltz campaign understands this crucial connection. They recognize that true security comes not from arsenals, but from healthy, resilient ecosystems where both wildlife and human communities can thrive. By investing in biodiversity, we invest in our collective future. Harris in the White House with a new title is setting the bar for environmental progress leaps and bounds, a type that we need for this generation. But let's not take it for granted. Imagine a world where we redirect resources from conflict to conservation, where instead of dropping bombs, we're planting trees, restoring wetlands, and protecting endangered species. Bringing them back, why not? This isn't just a dream, this is a necessity for survival and prosperity. Supporting the Harris Waltz campaign, we're not only voting for politicians, we're voting for a shift in priorities, a shift that recognizes the intrinsic link between environmental health and human welfare, a shift that prioritizes life over destruction, cooperation over conflict, and habitat over harm. Let's make our voices heard. Make your plan to vote today. I just moved into a new place in the Mountain West. How ambiguous. I'm in the Denver metro region if you ever want to say hi or go birding. Let's show that biodiversity leaders stand united in our call for a future where conservation takes precedence over conflict. And I hope one day I can see a Harris Hawk with Kamala Harris. That'd be really cool. Together, we can create a world where our resources nurture life instead of destroying it. And thank you so much for organizing this. It has been so great to see so many great speakers, folks that I know personally, folks that I Googled immediately, but will be following very soon. I really appreciate having this time with you all. Hope you have a good rest of your day.
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much, Taiki. That was really spectacular. I love the energy. I love the jumping out of the chair. That was really great. And also love the message, you know, that level of positivity is something that we really need. And we need to take all of that into the work that we're doing. I also just want to mention, you know, we're getting some questions and there's comments, but for some reason, I'm not able to put answers in the chat. I was putting answers in the chat and then realizing I was just like DMing other panelists. So we're going to figure that out. People who have questions, if they're not being answered in what in some of the comments, we're not always able to change in real time, but we will be collecting the questions and we will work to get you answers. So, okay. And so next up, and I'm going to echo Georgia, it is my great pleasure. There is a lot of pleasure introducing our tremendous panelists, is Christian Cooper. He is a self-described blurred, that is a black birder. He is also an Emmy Award winner, New York Times bestseller, best-selling author, and board member of New York City Bird Alliance. Please join me in welcoming Christian.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Georgia. Thank you, Marielle, for organizing this. Thank you for having me on. I want to say I'm a birder. Like a lot of people here, like Drew, who is our god and lodestar for black birders in many ways, like Taiki, like Dudley, like so many people. And as a birder, I am done. I have had enough because in my lifetime, I have seen that 1/3 reduction in the populations of our North American birds. And what makes me especially done about it is that I know that we can not only stop it, but we can reverse it. It is not a foregone conclusion. And I say that because on Staten Island, they took what used to be the biggest garbage dump in the world and they turned it into a grassland. And when they did, the sedge wrens came, and the grasshopper sparrows came, and the savanna sparrows came, and the meadowlarks came, and it became a new grassland habitat, and it is grassland birds in many ways that we are losing in the greatest numbers. So I know that this is not a given, and that is why I am so adamant about Harris Waltz and putting them in office, because I know with them at our back, we can stop these declines and reverse it. Now, you know, the most important thing we're talking about today here is biodiversity. We're not just talking about climate change. They're interrelated, but we're talking about biodiversity. And one of the things we were asked to talk about is what biodiversity means to us. And I will be honest, I don't know what biodiversity means to me. And what do I mean by that? I'll explain. I mean, for example, that this skin here is covered with bacteria, most of it harmless, some of it helpful, but it is basically a world unto itself. My eyelashes have these organisms called tardigrades crawling around on them. Harmless, it's just part of the natural world. My gut would not function without all the different things that are living inside me to help me digest my food. So we have this tendency to think about ourselves and nature as sort of these discrete organisms, when really we're all connected in this big web that has evolved together and functions as a whole. And so when I say that I don't know what biodiversity means to me, it means I don't understand what all those connections are. Nobody does. So when we let some of those connections die, when we let organisms disappear from our planet, we don't know what we're doing by cutting off that finger of ourselves. But we know we're going to suffer pain, and we know we're going to pay for it later. And that's why biodiversity is so important. And if you need a hard example to quantify, look at the example of paclitaxel. Paclitaxel is a drug that has saved countless cancer patients, particularly breast cancer, but other kinds of cancer as well. And paclitaxel, it's also known under the brand name of Taxol, was only found because someone took the bark of the Pacific yew tree and discovered this compound in it. And that compound was refined into paclitaxel, and it has saved hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of cancer patients over the decades since it was first discovered. We would not have that if we didn't have the biodiversity that creates things like Pacific yew trees. And we don't know what we're losing half the time when we lose these organisms. So that's why biodiversity is so important to me. Why is Harris Waltz so important to me? A lot of people have talked about what Vice President Kamala Harris has done as part of the administration. I'm not going to rehash that. I'm going to talk about what the administration has not done. What haven't they done? Well, they haven't finalized regulatory changes that weaken the Endangered Species Act. That's something that the Trump administration did as it was walking out the door after they had been defeated in order to try to cement and weaken the Endangered Species Act that protects our biodiversity. They knew they were gone, and they wanted to make sure that they did everything they could to undermine that Endangered Species Act before they were out the door. I think it was Michelle who talked about Deb Haaland being the Secretary of the Interior. Well, the first thing Trump did when he picked his Secretary of the Interior was to appoint Ryan Zinke. Ryan Zinke was a tool of the developers and the miners and the extractionists, and he did everything he could to undermine our public lands until finally, 2 years after he was appointed, he had to resign under a cloud of ethical accusations and misdoing. This is what we will get from the Trump administration. We already know what we will get from the Trump administration. And that's why Harris Waltz is so important to get them in there. They're not going to be perfect, but we know the disaster we're going to get if Trump gets in. That's why it's so important for us to fight for Harris Waltz. Now, how do we do that? Monica mentioned it, and I want to refine it a little bit. She said, talk to your friends, convince those who are on the fence. And that's really important, but I want to refine that. You want to focus on the undecided voters in the swing states. So all this tremendous energy that we have now, because we have energy, we have momentum, and it will mean nothing if we don't harness it and focus it on getting those undecided voters in swing states to fall our way. And that's our job. It is up to us to get that done. I think Michelle mentioned that she was writing vote forward letters in her spare time. I've been doing the same thing with my partner. It's really easy. You write them to undecided voters in swing states, but as you can do with this on this call, give money. Because if you give money, the campaign can use that where it's most needed. But beyond just giving money, give up your time, write those letters. If you can, take some time to pound the pavement and knock on doors in those swing states. I'm not going to be doing that here in New York because it's pointless. New York is going to break for Harris Wants. But I'm going to be spending a week in October in Philadelphia, knocking on doors, pounding the pavement to get people engaged. Not everybody can take the time to do that, but whatever you can give. As Wade said, and I love this expression that he used, give till it bleeds, give till it hurts. That's what we need to do right now. And it's not forever. It's just for the next roughly 70 days that we need to be all on doing everything we can to make the outcome that we need. So, you know, we've got to work for the environment, and part of working for the environment means working for Harris Waltz to make sure they get elected over the next 70 days. Our work won't end then. Even if we succeed and we get Harris Waltz in, there'll still be plenty of work to do, but that's the focus we need to have for the next roughly 70 days, is getting them elected and doing everything we can to take that energy we have right now and focus it like a laser on undecided voters in swing states and moving them into our column. So that's all I got. Thanks for listening, and Harris Waltz 2024.
Thank you, Chris, for your passion. You also dropped in a trophic lesson there with fresh gills in Staten Island. The plants brought the insects and the insects brought back the birds. We can't let organisms disappear, and you definitely spotlighted the places where Harris Waltz can act for nature as president and vice president. So thank you. I'm going to turn it over to Marielle, who's going to introduce someone from the campaign.
Hi, thank you, Georgia. We are so excited to have someone with us from the campaign. So I'd like to introduce Jake Schwartz. He is here with us from the Harris for President campaign. Take it away, Jake.
Hi, all. Hope everyone can hear me. Having a little Wi-Fi troubles. I went outside for the call to this garden by the office. I thought that'd be fitting, and then the sunset, and so now it's just blackout. But anyway, joining you all from nature, as we should. So my name is Jake Schwartz. I am the interim climate voters director on the Harris Waltz campaign, and I am so excited to be with you all tonight and just speak briefly about some of the work that we are doing to engage these voters, some of the work that we're going to do in the future, and then some just accomplishments of what we've done and how excited we are about all of this. But first of all, thank you all so much for joining this call on a Wednesday evening, totally ad hoc. You know, the campaign had no organizing in this call. You all are just so passionate that you pulled it together. Honestly, that is inspiring to see and to hear. So as I said, we all are climate and environmental voters, and we are a critical part of the Democratic coalition. And so I view our goal as showing them why that is. It's not just because we vote for the planet, right? That's been established. Lovers of nature and conservation have voted, you know, usually Democratic for a long time. But it's more than that now. You know, now we're becoming a true significant part of the Democratic coalition. So that means we fight for these candidates, we organize, and yes, we donate for what we believe in. So what that means in real life is that means everyone on this call filling out one of our volunteer links, signing up for a phone bank, texting climate to 30330, or signing up to donate and get involved in some way, whatever makes the most sense for you. We need every single person on this call, every single person who cares about these issues to all get involved in different ways. That's the only way we win. And that's the only way we show the party, the country, the world that we are an important political coalition and we fight for what we believe in. So in addition to those kind of general ways to get involved, the next really specific action we're taking is a weekly environmental voters phone bank. The first one actually is tomorrow evening at 6 p.m. I can send in the chat a mobilized link to sign up for that. We'll be hearing from Governor Jay Inslee, and then, you know, gathering as a group of voters who are volunteers who care about this issue to call voters about this issue and about all the issues that we think we're going to win on in November. Yeah, and I just want to share a couple kind of top lines of where we are as a campaign, how excited we are, you know, what the momentum is and where it's going from here. Just in the last 3 weeks, the Harris Waltz campaign, crazy to think Governor Walz only been with us for a couple weeks, kicked off a Battleground States tour, rallying electric crowds of 14,000 in Pennsylvania, 12,000 in Wisconsin, 15,000 in Michigan, and then another 15,000 in Arizona. That was all in 1 week. That was in the first week of Governor Walz, a true lifelong environmental champion, being on the ticket. I think that shows the excitement and momentum that we have better than anything. My other favorite stat that I like saying is in the 24 hours, so the one day after Walz joined the ticket, we raised $36 million, the majority of which came from grassroots donations, and many of which came from environmental voters and environmental donors like you all. So there's still no question this is going to be a close race. Polls show it neck and neck everywhere. And so that we can absolutely not get overconfident, but we can acknowledge that we have a lot of momentum, a lot of excitement about the issues, because we're right on the issues. We're right about the important issues, like literally saving this planet, and we have to show that. And so some of the things that we're doing in the next month is we're going to have a official Climate Voters for Harris Walz launch at some point in September with a big principal event, a massive rally that then gets earned media where we can talk about this narrative that climate voters, environmental voters are here for this ticket. In addition to just a launch, we'll be having a week of action where there'll be phone banks and canvases that are all environmental branded in all of the battleground states. And then all of our great outside partners will be holding programming as well, doing things like small rallies, seminars, a lot of communication and digital work, a lot of LTEs and op-eds, really blasting the message everywhere throughout September. And so if you're not ready to get involved, tomorrow's phone bank, then get ready for September, because we want as many climate actions as possible in September, so that at the end of September, at the end of Climate Week in New York, we can turn back and say, look, this was an unprecedented month for environmental voters and environmental volunteers and donors, and it really proves that we are a key part of the coalition, and we're going to win because of that. And so that's the narrative we're trying to shape, and that's the narrative that we have right now. So those are just some stories, anecdotes from the campaign. Again, I am honored to be here with you all tonight. I'll drop that Mobilize link in the chat, and look forward to seeing you all on the road. But thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Jake, this is Marielle. Sorry, before you go off, there were a number of questions of people asking about policy issues. Would you mind going through just like, some of the top level things that are up and running? Thank you.
I'll preface it with saying I'm not a policy expert, and I'm not allowed to, speak on policy on behalf of the campaign, but I can try to say what the campaign stances are on certain issues. Where are those questions? Are they in the chat?
No, you know what? They're in the Q&A, and they were largely like, people just wanted to hear, they were really broad questions. What are some policy stances on the environment from the campaign? So, if you can't speak to it, that's totally fine. But I just thought since we had you.
No, of course. Unfortunately, I only see the questions since I joined, so I don't see all the questions. But I can try to just speak broadly for a second.
Yeah, it was broad.
Their stances. And I'll also preface by saying we have an official page of the website that is all about the Vice President's climate and environmental conservation stances. That should be out, fingers crossed, this weekend. Can't promise that, but hopefully very soon, those official policy stances, one-pagers, and website will become public. And so that'll be a comprehensive list of everything they want to do for the planet. I'll just speak in broad terms that I know the Vice President has spoken about expanding on the president's record. So that means building off of the IRA. That means building off of all of the EPA regulations and the conservation rules that have been passed, and using that as a starting point of all the great work that we want to do. And again, details to come, hopefully within the week.
Thank you, Jake. Thank you for joining us this evening from the campaign. We have put the link to Kamala Harris's website in the chat, so folks bookmark it so you can be the first to know when those policy statements drop. Before we close, I want to read some remarks written by Dr. Rae Wynn-Grant, who unfortunately was not able to join us this evening because of some conflicts. It is an honor to have been invited to join this group of biodiversity conservation leaders who are banding together this evening to show support for Vice President Harris. For the past 2 years, I have been invited to speak at the White House during Earth Month to advocate for equitable access to science careers for all Americans. And my lens for these talks have always been wildlife conservation. As you've heard from the previous speakers, it is abundantly clear that if the potential Harris-Walz administration marches or increases the environmental work carried out by the Biden-Harris administration, our country and our planet will be able to move in a direction that can increase our chances of continuing to live on a healthy, balanced, dare I say, thriving planet. At the same time, it's important to acknowledge that excited as I am for the breath of fresh air that is Kamala Harris, I am also opposed to the violence and militarism that has come along with every single administration that this country has ever had. Holding space for those feelings, taking action against violence and oppression, supporting the environmental strategies of the campaign, while advocating for increased environmental protections are all happening at one time in my world, and likely yours too. So let us rally behind what feels good, what symbolizes progress, and what we know protects our vital biodiversity right now, while also organizing locally and continuing to push for the version of our collective future that protects all of us. Thank you for joining this call to action, and I cannot wait to celebrate at the polls. Onward, signed Rae. Thank you so much for sticking with us past 8:30. I'm going to say my thanks now and then pass it off to Marielle to close out. Thank you all for attending. Thank you to all the speakers for their advocacy for nature. Thank you to everyone who has helped us in any way to bring this event to fruition. Finally, thank you to the folks who are uplifting a biodiversity agenda in New York City. You know who you are. And we will be back in September, so look out for a save the date email. Over to you, Marielle.
Thank you, Georgia. And I don't really have much to add. Again, thank you to everyone. This was so much work in so little time. And, you know, Georgia was like, I think we can do this. And I was like, I think you're nuts. But she was right. So this was really thrilling. We're so grateful for everyone's participation in making this a really great event. But this is not the only event. Like we mentioned earlier, this is something that we want to continue to do and build on. We want there to be a real presence for conservation and nature. And so that's where all of us come in. We will do the work. We're going to be in touch about organizing some events. People mentioned postcards. So we're going to look into all of that and get back to you. So we have your emails, we'll be in touch. But in the meantime, thank you for joining us this evening. And we're grateful that you took time out to be with us. And have a great week. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.